Thanks to all of you for coming here today, and our friends from Singapore. Glad that you made the long trek, and it's good to see Ravi Menon is now up for a second or a third time for another 2-year stint. For those of you not familiar with the Monetary Authority of Singapore, they're one of the leading intellectual lights anywhere of any central bank anywhere in the world. So I'm glad to see that Ravi is back. Great agenda here today, and kudos to my colleagues who put it together. Everything from machine learning to cloud computing and quantum computing. I'm trying to figure out quantum computing. It's quantum mechanics, I think, is a little beyond me. The Schrödinger's cat phenomenon, where the cat is in the box and the cat is both alive and dead at the same time, somehow escapes my sensibilities. But I'm working on quantum mechanics, and I look forward to what we're going to hear this afternoon. We've got some great keynotes this afternoon as well, or throughout the day. Jason Furman, who's here. For those of you that don't know, Jason is one of Washington's really true intellectuals. He served in numerous governments. He and I were on opposite sides of some pretty fierce campaigns. You always knew when Jason showed up on the opposite campaign because the quality of the caliber of the work that was being produced increased exponentially. Truly one of the smartest people I know, and this is going to be ironic. He's going to think it's ironic I'm saying this. I actually look forward to the day he returns to Washington. I think we could use more people like Jason. He's a true public servant. We actually have two other great public servants, which I'm going to get to in just a moment, Craig Phillips and Chris Giancarlo, who've come here today. I know they're quite busy. They've got a lot on their plate. Before I get to them, let me also thank our friends from Deloitte. Bob Country, who runs the Global Financial Services practice, is a dear friend. We've had a great relationship with Deloitte. They've been supporters of ours over the years, and we appreciate their support. Let me hit a couple of key highlights and sort of set the stage for the day before I bring up our guest this morning. And let me start by saying, last week I had the very difficult assignment of being in Florence. Not Florence, Alabama, but Florence, Italy. And I love Italy. I love going to Florence. I love going to Venice. I love going to Rome. I love the food, which I consumed a lot of last week. I love the culture, the topography, the history. It's also the birthplace of banking. In fact, we still have 3 banking phenomena today that was invented by the Italians. Double entry bookkeeping, letters of credit, and bank holding company structure. All were founded in both Venice and in Milan. But I also like the Italians because they're historic disruptors. Leonardo da Vinci, Galileo, Dante, Michelangelo, Vivaldi, Verdi, Armani, Ferragamo. They were all individuals who took on the establishment. Sometimes the church was the establishment, sometimes just conventional wisdom. But one of my favorite disruptors is an architect and artist by the name of Bernini, a 17th century founder of the Baroque style of architecture and art. And he has this wonderful quote, which I share with my staff on a regular basis, which goes as follows: "He who does not break the rules achieves nothing." He who does not break the rules achieves nothing. Now, the challenge is breaking the rules in art and architecture and fashion and literature and politics even is fine. Technology is fine. You know, the quote from Facebook for a number of years was, move fast and break things. The challenge for banking is that breaking the rules gets us in a bit of trouble. And so the challenge for us, the future of banking or insurance, other regulated entities, is how do we succeed and innovate as a highly regulated entity in a world of rapid, almost breathtaking digital transformation? And how do we do it new and different and novel ways, and one that adheres to and responds to consumers' and shareholders' needs? How do we function and survive and succeed when everyone around us is breaking the rules, and yet we, by the nature of what we do, are challenged in replicating that? Now, banks aren't technology novices. They've always been at the forefront of technology. The first users of mainframes were banks. Bank of America was one of the first users, purchasers of IBM mainframes back in the 60s, and we've had ATMs, which have been around for over 50 years. Internet banking have been around for 25 years. So banks have been in the middle of technology. The question is, how do you do it given the challenges that we see? Issues of scalability of the cloud, near ubiquitous connectivity, expectations of in the use of mobility, the exponential use of data. In fact, the amount of data we're now producing annually is the entire, think about the entire book of Netflix, the entire catalog of Netflix, streamed 10 million times. Now think about that. That's how much data we're producing annually, and that will increase by 200-fold over the next year. Distributed ledger technology, which we'll talk about, machine learning, artificial intelligence, which we'll also talk about, and then add on to that quantum computing, which I mentioned, the ubiquity of AI, turbocharged with neurotechnology, the Internet of Things, 20 billion items connected by 2022, fifth generation wireless, which have obviously has now become much more complicated, just on the front page of the Washington Post today, the issue of national security, gamification, facial recognition, private crypto assets, and the list goes on and on. As a result, the industry is spending billions of dollars on technology. In fact, it's an arms race, not only against each other, but against technology firms. For example, Bank of America will spend about $16 billion this year, JP Morgan about $11 billion, Morgan Stanley about $4 billion on technology, versus Amazon's $22 billion, Google's $16 billion, and Facebook's $8 billion. So in many ways, banks and insurance companies in the financial sector is spending as much or more than what we think of as traditional technology companies. And there are other issues as well. So how do we think about new entrants, the so-called fintechs? The phrase has been kicked around now for many, many years, and we have seen fintechs pick up issues and market share in terms of payments and credit extension. And the fintech industry has matured and matured noticeably so. I've been going to Silicon Valley now for 4 or 5 years, and when I started going and meeting with a lot of startups, there were ping pong tables and skateboards and people in shorts and T-shirts. And now that's changed. What we see are individuals in polo shirts with the brands on the lapel, selling as vendors to the industry that they once thought that they would disrupt and put out of business. In fact, National FinTech Day is August 1st. Does anyone know the significance of August 1st? It is the anniversary of the death of Cosimo de' Medici, who died August 1st, 1464, who was considered the father of modern banking. So in many ways, the idea of the fintech industry is to take on traditional banking, again, originating in Italy. The other issue is what do we do and how do we think about incumbent technology platforms and financial, which has 600 million customers. The goal is to get to 2 billion by 2023. They have a market cap greater than Goldman Sachs and money market fund larger than JP Morgan. So how do we think about, how do we compete with these entities that are regulated and thought of differently than incumbent financial institutions? And then the centrality of data, data privacy, data localization, data enrichment, data ownership, data sharing, data privacy, so on and so forth. There isn't a meeting that we'd have with our board or CEOs where the issue of data doesn't come up, whether it's GDPR or PSD2 or data localization. And we just put out a paper a few months ago on data localization. I urge you to read it. There's also issues of how we think about supervisors and regulators' approval of artificial intelligence and machine learning. For many of them, this is a black box technology. It makes them a little nervous. They're not sure how to regulate it, how to think about it. And so we, as an industry, we as a leading industry think tank, have to help the public sector understand what this technology is and where possible to defang it. And then there's issues of operational vulnerability. Cyber resiliency. I just talked to a CEO of a large US bank who said their systems are under attack, a serious attack, every 6 seconds. The issue of third-party vendors, who holds the liability if something goes wrong. The cloud, the issue of concentration risk versus idiosyncratic firm risk. And then issues of AML and financial crime. The banking sector is a policeman for the financial sector. Global illicit flows are somewhere between $1.5 and $2.5 trillion, with the interdiction rate's about 1%. The question is, how can we increase the interdiction rate beyond the 1% and do it with the use of the kind of technology that we know that is off the shelf? So we're going to discuss all these issues here today with our 2 guests this morning and then the full agenda. So let me just return before I invite our guests up to where I started, and the person I mentioned, Bernini, Lorenzo Bernini, who's in late 1646 started on a over the life-size marble rendition of something called Truth Revealed by Time. And it was a tough time for him because he'd built two bell towers on either side of the Vatican, and one had begun collapsing, so they'd be taken down. So as an architect, he was in somewhat, had lost his reputation as one of the great leaders or thinkers of the time. So sculpture was based on an adage of the time, which is, fear not, for sooner or later, time will reveal the truth. Sooner or later, time will reveal the truth. And I think that's something we need to think about in our industry, because I don't know how these issues of technology and innovation are going to play out, but we will know with time what combination of business models, technologies, and regulatory and supervisory responses will create the kind of dynamic financial services players and entities and industry that meets consumers' needs as well as adheres to the regulated space that supervisors and regulators lord over us. Anyway, an industry that has been around for 600 years is going through profound change, and I suspect it will be continuous profound change. So with that, let's get started and bring up two of my very good friends, Chris Giancarlo, the chairman of the U.S. Commodities Futures Trading Corporation, and Craig Phillips, counsel to the Secretary of the U.S. Treasury. If you guys would come up. Thank you very much.